They say you can measure a man by his success, by the glass towers he builds, the deals he closes, the empire he commands. I used to believe that. I was building one of those empires. My name is Leo, and my world was a symphony of polished steel, high-stakes negotiations, and the constant hum of a city beneath my feet. From my penthouse office, the world seemed small, controllable. Every detail was accounted for, every calculation precise. This was the life I had meticulously crafted, brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint. It was a testament to my drive, my ambition, and maybe a silent rebuttal to a past I desperately wanted to leave behind. My life was a paradox of constant motion and profound stillness. The stillness was in my heart, a place I had deliberately sealed off years ago. The phone was a constant companion, ringing with the promise of more projects, more money, more recognition. But I was always chasing something I couldn't quite name. My relationships were like my buildings, sleek, impressive, but ultimately cold. I had a beautiful family, a wife and a son, but I often found myself treating my son, Alex, like an extension of my work, another project to be perfected. I would push him, prod him, always worried he wouldn't be enough. The memory of my childhood was a blurry, faded photograph I kept locked away. It was a world of sawdust, the rich scent of mahogany, and the rhythmic, silent dance of my father's hands. Dad wasn't a man of many words. He was a woodworker, an artisan who spoke through the grain of the lumber he shaped. His workshop was a sanctuary to him, a place where he could be with his thoughts and his creations. It was also, to my young eyes, a place of silence and rejection. I would stand in the doorway, a crayon drawing held proudly in my small hand. "Look, Dad," I'd say, my voice full of a child's hope. He would glance up, a faint smile on his face, a nod, and then his eyes would return to the workbench. Back to the hammer, the chisel, the silent work that seemed to consume him. In my head I heard what wasn't said: "Go away, I'm busy." The warmth of that sawdust-filled air felt cold to me. I wasn't enough. My drawings, my dreams, my very presence weren't as important as a piece of wood, and so I made a promise to myself. I would build a life of purpose and sound, not of quiet dedication. I would be an architect, not a carpenter. My hands would touch blueprints and keyboards, not hammers and saws. My worth would be measured by the structures I built from the ground up, not the small, intricate pieces of wood my father painstakingly created. My life became a monument to that promise, a monument built on the foundation of a silent misunderstanding. I had pushed my memories of him into a distant corner of my mind, a dusty workshop of my own. I convinced myself that my success was a triumph over his perceived indifference. I thought I had moved on, that I had won. But the truth is, a part of me was always still that little boy, standing in the doorway, waiting for a word he never heard. And then the call came, the one that every child, no matter how old, dreads. It was my mother's voice, small and trembling. "Leo, your father is gone." The call was an earthquake, a sudden, brutal collapse of the silent foundation I had built my life upon. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt that ache of a misunderstanding or a silent expectation, please hit the like button. Subscribing helps us share more of these stories of human connection and redemption. Your support means the world. The world, once a meticulous blueprint, was now a chaotic smear. The city lights blurred through the car window as I drove north, away from the glass towers and into a landscape of quiet, rolling hills I had tried so hard to forget. The house was exactly as I remembered it, a modest two-story with a porch swing that no one ever used. It felt smaller now, a relic of a past that no longer had a future. The front door creaked open with a groan that sounded like a sigh. The air inside was heavy with the ghosts of a life lived. It smelled of lemon polish and something else, something distinctly Dad. A scent I hadn't realized I missed until it hit me with the force of a physical blow. My mother was a fragile, trembling shadow of herself. She moved with a silent, disoriented grace, her hands constantly reaching for things that weren't there. "He just went, Leo," she said, her voice thin, as a whisper. One day, he was in the workshop working on a new birdhouse, and the next, he wasn't. She didn't cry. The grief was a frozen lake she walked on, afraid to shatter the surface. I realized then that my father's silence hadn't just been reserved for me. It was the foundation of our whole family. There were no grand declarations, no shared laughs, just a quiet, steady presence that we had all taken for granted until it was suddenly, brutally gone. The silence in the house now was a suffocating blanket, heavy with the weight of all the things left unsaid. I wandered through the rooms, a stranger in a familiar place. Every object was a silent accusation. The old armchair he used to sit in, the newspaper still folded on the coffee table from the day he passed, the worn-out mug with a faint coffee stain. My gaze kept returning to the one place I dreaded most, the workshop. It sat behind the house, a separate entity, a small wooden building where my father had lived out his truest life. It was a place I had deliberately avoided since I left home for college, a place I associated with disappointment and the crushing weight of unspoken expectations. Now, it stood as a monument to a man I felt I never truly knew. My mother asked me to help clean it out. The request was a small, reasonable knife to the heart. "It's too hard for me, Leo," she said, her eyes pleading. "I can't face it." I nodded, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I wanted to say no, to run back to my perfect sterile office and my controlled life. But I couldn't. This was my penance. This was the final, terrible conversation I had to have with him. I pushed open the workshop door. The hinges shrieked in protest, a sound that felt like a scream. Dust motes danced in the lone ray of sunlight piercing the grimy window, illuminating a scene of arrested life. Tools lay scattered on the workbench, exactly where he had left them. A half-finished birdhouse sat in a vise, its pieces waiting to be joined. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust, linseed oil, and my own profound regret. I walked toward the workbench, my hands trembling. My fingers brushed against a plane, its metal cold and unyielding. With each touch, a memory resurfaced. The scrape of sandpaper, the whir of the saw, the steady rhythm of his hammer. But all those memories were silent. They were the background noise of my childhood, never the melody. The despair washed over me, a physical sickness. I hadn't just lost my father. I had lost the chance to ever understand him. The silence of his life had become the deafening silence of his death. The workshop became my prison. The task of cleaning it out was a cruel joke. How do you clean out a life? How do you organize a lifetime of silent love and unspoken resentments? I started with the most mundane of tasks, hoping the physical labor would drown out the noise in my head. I swept sawdust that had been there for decades, each whisk of the broom a futile attempt to erase the past. I organized rusted tools that I barely recognized, their shapes and functions a language I had never learned. A chisel, worn smooth by a lifetime of use, felt like a foreign object in my hand. It was a tangible connection to my father that I couldn't understand, a bridge I had never crossed. The frustration was a slow, burning fire. I would try to move a heavy plank of wood, and my hands, used to the sterile touch of a keyboard, would splinter and ache. I saw myself as a caricature of a man, all mind and no hands, a builder of digital fantasies who couldn't even lift a simple 2x4. My father had been a man of substance, of dirt under his nails and calluses on his palms. I was a man of clean shirts and manicured lawns, a failure, not in the world's eyes, but in the only eyes that ever truly mattered. The more I worked, the more I felt like an imposter in his world. I was trespassing on hallowed ground, a place where he was the king, and I was a clumsy pathetic outsider. Days bled into a week. My pristine office clothes were replaced by a paint-splattered shirt I found in a box. My hands, once symbols of my success, were now bruised and filthy. My exhaustion was a physical weight, but it was nothing compared to the mental fatigue. Every object I touched was a memory I couldn't decipher. A half-finished rocking horse, a small wooden boat with a tiny carved sail. Who were these for? A fleeting thought. Were they for me? Would be immediately. Crushed by the weight of my own cynicism. No, he was just a craftsman. He built things. It didn't mean anything. This was my narrative, the one I had clung to for so long. To challenge it would be to admit a lifetime of self-inflicted pain. It was easier to believe he was distant than to face the possibility that I had been blind. The isolation was complete. I was a ghost in my own past, haunted by the spectre of a man who was right there the whole time and whom I had chosen to ignore. The house was empty. My mother had gone to a friend's, and I was alone with a man I couldn't talk to, a life I couldn't understand. I found a box of old blueprints and sketches, my father's ideas for projects that never got built. His handwriting was simple, precise. I looked at the intricate details, the plans for a small library, a child's swing set, a garden gate. Each drawing was a conversation I had never had, a conversation about beauty, about utility, about life, a conversation I had been too busy and too arrogant to ever initiate. I felt a surge of rage, not at him but at myself. For all my success, my towering achievements, I felt incredibly small. My empire of steel and glass was just that, a fortress I had built to keep people out, especially the one person who I had wanted to let in the most. The workshop, once a symbol of his indifference, was now a monument to my own. I was the one who had been absent. I was the one who was truly silent. I slumped against the workbench, burying my face in my hands, a desperate guttural sob finally escaping my chest. It wasn't just grief, it was the raw, unadulterated pain of a profound and irreversible mistake. The kind of pain that feels like a physical tear, a wound that will never fully heal. I sat on the dusty floor, the weight of a lifetime of misunderstanding pressing down on me. I was a man lost in the ruins of a relationship I had never truly understood. My hands, caked with sawdust and grime, felt foreign to me, a testament to my clumsy intrusion into my father's world. I saw his face in my mind's eye, a man I had always seen as stoic and distant, and for the first time I saw the weariness in his eyes, the subtle lines of a life lived for others. I saw the man, not the myth of my own making. My gaze fell upon his old toolbox. It was a relic, a metal box with a faded green paint job and countless dents and scratches. It was the centerpiece of his world, a collection of tools that had built a life, a home, and a future. It felt like the last piece of the puzzle, a final act of respect I owed him. With a sigh that felt like it came from the depths of my soul, I knelt and began to wipe it down. I cleaned the rust from the handle, felt the deep grooves where his fingers had rested 1,000 times. Each dent told a story, a clumsy drop, a hard-won victory. My own hands trembled as I worked, a strange mix of reverence and profound sorrow. I lifted the lid, revealing a jumble of hammers, wrenches and screwdrivers. As I started to sort them, a section of the inside felt off. A small panel just a few inches wide seemed to be slightly raised. With a new and sudden focus, I pushed on it, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just a part of the box. It was a compartment hidden with a craftsman's subtle precision. I used a small screwdriver to pry it open, the metal groaning softly in protest. Inside, nestled among a few loose nails and a forgotten screw, was a small folded piece of paper. It was yellowed and brittle, with a crease worn deep into its center. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The ink was faded, the handwriting simple and unadorned. My father's handwriting. A wave of disbelief washed over me. He wasn't a man who wrote letters. He wasn't a man of words. He was a man of wood and silence. I brought the paper closer, the air catching in my throat as I read the words, their meaning crashing over me like a tidal wave. It was not a message of love in the way I had always yearned for, but something far more profound, something that shattered my entire understanding of him. My son, one day you will be greater than I am, not with wood, but with iron and glass, not with your hands, but with your mind. And even if you think me small, know that every piece I have created, I created to build the foundation for your future. The world went silent. The workshop, once a place of frustrating memories, was now a cathedral of truth. My legs gave way, and I sank. To the floor, the note clutched in my trembling hands. My father didn't reject my drawings. He was building for my dreams. His silence wasn't indifference. It was a quiet, relentless act of love. He was making sure I would never have to be a carpenter like him unless I chose to be. He was sacrificing his time, his energy, and his words so I could have a world of steel and glass. I was not a disappointment to him. I was his masterpiece. I saw his quiet nods not as rejection, but as admiration. He saw my potential, my mind, my talent, and he gave me the silent gift of his unwavering support. My grief, once a cold and heavy stone in my chest, transformed into something else entirely, a profound, earth-shattering gratitude. I had spent a lifetime running from his silent legacy, only to find that I had been building on top of it all along. If this story has touched your heart and shown you the power of a hidden truth, please consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Your sharing helps us build a community of hope and understanding. I returned to my office not as the same man, but as a ghost, returning to a body with a new soul. The glass tower didn't feel like a monument to my success anymore. It felt like a testament to my father's sacrifice. The cold steel and polished surfaces now hummed with the warmth of a truth I had finally discovered. The blueprint on my desk wasn't just a plan for a building. It was a continuation of a legacy, a design built on the unshakable foundation of a father's silent love. I sat at my grand mahogany desk, the very embodiment of the life I had built, but my eyes were on something else. In a small, clear container, I had placed a handful of wood shavings from my father's workshop, a tiny, insignificant pile of dust to anyone else, but to me it was a tangible link to a love I had so long doubted. Next to my state-of-the-art computer, where I designed worlds of steel and light, I placed a small piece of carved wood, an imperfect, slightly weathered heart my father had made. It wasn't a masterpiece of craftsmanship, it was a masterpiece of devotion. The polished sheen of my office and the rough grain of that simple piece of wood sat in perfect, beautiful contrast. I finally understood that my father wasn't small. He was a giant. He stood in his workshop, a master of his domain, and with every strike of his hammer and every scrape of his plane, he was building me a ladder to climb. He wasn't indifferent. He was dedicated. He wasn't silent because he had nothing to say. He was silent because his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. My whole life I had been searching for a verbal "I love you" and had completely missed the 1,000 tiny acts of devotion that were his true language. One evening I found my son Alex in his room, hunched over his video games. He looked up, expecting the usual lecture about homework or screen time, but I just smiled. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice softer than he had ever heard it. I sat down next to him and held out a small, simple wooden block. "This belonged to your grandpa." Alex took it, his face a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "He used to make things with his hands," I explained, my voice thick with emotion. I pulled out a small piece of sandpaper and a small, kid-friendly saw I had bought. "I never learned how he did it," I admitted, "but I want to learn with you. We can build something together." The last scene is of me and Alex in our A garage, the space now filled with the gentle hum of a saw and the quiet rasp of sandpaper. I am clumsy at first, my movements uncertain, but I am there. I am teaching him a language I had spent a lifetime trying to understand. The look on his face is not one of expectation, but of simple, pure joy. And as I help guide his hand, I feel a connection not just to him, but to my own father. The cycle of silence is broken. The silence is now filled with the sound of learning, of creating, and of a love that is finally beautifully and openly expressed. My father's greatest creation wasn't a piece of furniture or a birdhouse. His greatest creation was me. And my greatest creation will be the bridge I build to my son. I learned that sometimes the greatest love isn't spoken, it's built. It's found in the quiet sacrifices and the tireless work that lays the groundwork for someone else's success. If this story reminds you of someone you love, someone who showed their love through actions, not just words, leave a comment below and share your own story. Thank you for watching and for allowing us to be a part of your journey today.